Good Friday. We only call it good because we know the end of the story. We know that resurrection and life comes. It's good for us. It's a blessing this day. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. As we just heard from Hebrews, Paul's letter to the Hebrews. Do we learn obedience from what we suffer, what we are suffering? Or do we get mad and rebel against God and against God's will? In Matthew's Gospel last Sunday, we heard in chapter 26, verse 39, how Jesus prayed that this cup might pass him by. Well, if you look in Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, 31 to 39, several times Jesus prays, Abba, Father, all things are possible with you. Remove this cup from me. Then he goes and finds his disciples sleeping, and then he goes back and says similar words, says Mark's Gospel. But Jesus adds, not as I will, as you will, in each one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Luke, he sweats blood. In chapter 22, verse 41, remove this cup from me, not as I will, but as you will. It's almost hard to justify this with John's Gospel, because in John's Gospel, Jesus is so in control. When they come to arrest him, he's giving the orders in the garden. If you came for me, let these men go. And he says, when he asks who they are looking for, Jesus the Nazarene, I am. Of course, they fall down on the ground because they recognize those words from the burning bush so many years ago. They were faithful Jewish people. And Moses in the desert, when he saw this burning bush, went closer, and from the burning bush came words, remove your sandals. And then he sends Moses to the Egyptians to free the Israelites. And who Moses says is questioning, and he says, who am I to tell them sent me? Tell them I am sent you. So those are the words that Jesus uses, the words that came from the burning bush. In John's Gospel, the divinity of Jesus is on display. Of course, Christians had to deal with this reality, the stark contrast between the divine and the human. And in the Greek, it's called the hypostatic union. That was the first language of the church. All the New Testament is written in Greek. And Jesus weds the human and divine natures perfectly in his person. He suffered temptation as human beings do, but never sinned. And as we heard from Hebrews, he learned obedience from what he suffered. Son of God, son though he was. His prayer in the garden was not answered. Let this cup of suffering pass me by. In the end, though, he said to his Father, not as I will, but as you will. I am not inclined towards suffering, to accept the cup of suffering, and I try to sidestep it whenever possible. But sometimes you just have to swallow the frog, as the old saying goes. Do what you need to do. Suffer in order to be free. A little example is preparing taxes. I have to pay taxes because I'm one of the diocesan priests. I have to use my funds. I'm not a religious order priest where they put all their salaries together and someone handles it. They usually are tax-free organizations. But I have personal money that I have to use and determine how it's going to be used for the sake of the world. Ask Jesus how to use it. Well, I procrastinate, especially with taxes, preparing them, and I usually suffer more because of it. If I would just accept the suffering, it would go better. Just do it. And I'd actually suffer less in the end. Many people fall away from God because of suffering in the world. How could a good God allow pandemics or suffering at all? Isn't he all powerful? How can he be all good, all powerful, and allow this? There was a doctor in Italy during the worst of the pandemic, and people were dying. He and his friends were atheists. He witnessed, and during the worst part, when they had no room in the hospital and they were just selectors, allowing only some to stay, they could only treat so many people and send others home knowing they were going to die. A pastor came during the worst of that time, and 75-year-old man just held people's hands in the suffering and prayed with them. And those doctors listened when they were so tired they could hardly stand, and they came to faith. In the good times they didn't. In the suffering they did. Isaiah 52, the first reading. So shall he startle many nations. Because of him, kings shall stand speechless. What? He did what? For some mysterious reason, when people accept suffering, even as they pray that it will be removed, God's power shows forth, and people come to Jesus. In the good times and wealth, people start to think they are in control. Subtly, they begin to believe they don't really need God, I think. Maybe that's one of the reasons Jesus calls blessed the poor, the persecuted, those who realize something is missing, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. If our leader in salvation, who wedded the divine and human natures perfectly, learned obedience from what he suffered, hopefully we will do the same. May we learn obedience from what we suffer instead of becoming angry and disobedient. Let it be done to me as you say, said Mary. Not as I will, but as you will. May we follow the example of our Lord and his mother.